Welcome everyone, Christine here with the discussion about World of Warcraft. I want to talk about every single World of Warcraft expansion and where they ended up being. What's the tier list? Which are the best World of Warcraft expansions and which are the worst? We've had quite a few expansions over the years, quite a few versions of World of Warcraft, so let's rank them. I'll take it chronologically, so I'll start with vanilla and work my way to Shadowlands and talk about where I feel each of these versions of WoW ends up being. Starting with vanilla. I'm going to give it an A tier. Some would give it, or many people would give it an S tier, but the issue with vanilla, the issues with vanilla, when it came out, it had so many server issues, stability issues, bugs, glitches, balance problems, raid design issues, raid issues. And it took Blizzard quite a bit of time to fix those. Now, they did fix them. They did vastly improve the game by the time it was over, by the time even Naxxramas had come out, let alone by the time TBC had come out. But even then, when you play vanilla, when you look at the class balance, when you look at the class design, there's some things lacking. You can start with the questing experience. And yes, it is a great epic adventure that takes you across the world, but much of it can be very, very tedious. The gold grinding can be very tedious. The economy has many issues, many gaping holes in vanilla that people have been able to exploit in Classic, and I imagine that people are going to exploit issues in Classic Fresh Season of Mastery. There's many problems because of the world buffs and the class design and class balance, issues with the BGs, issues with PvP. Vanilla was an amazing experience. Don't get me wrong on this. I enjoyed it when it came out. Millions of people enjoyed it. It was a significant improvement on an MMORPG genre in general, and it defined it, ended up defining it. But vanilla had problems that would not be fixed during its lifetimes. And yet, despite it, vanilla is the only version of WoW which wasn't focused in any way, shape, or form on min-maxing, with the exception of some guilds trying to really push Nax and Cthulhu. Vanilla was more about exploring the world, going on this grand adventure. It's the only expansion that has 40-man raiding, which I feel is what MMOs should be about. Not this idea that people are peddling nowadays, 10-man raiding, even lower than that. That's a great experience. No, we're playing an MMO. We're playing a massively multiplayer online game. You take that out, it no longer is that. And that is a problem in modern WoW. And I feel quite a bit of the magic was lost with Blizzard trying to optimize and raiding and min-max raiding and embracing that idea. Vanilla was not about that. It's clunky. It has a lot of issues to this day, but in many ways, it has a charm that you just don't see in other versions of WoW. And on top of that, of the things that were introduced, be it Onyxian, Nefarian, Ragnaros, the Dark Irons, Cthulhu, the Old Gods, the Scarlet Crusade, the Ashbringer, many of them still have major impact to this day in a way that characters or lore bits introduced in other expansions just don't. It was significantly influential. It still is significantly influential to this very day. The base version of WoW, it was well done in quite a few ways, or it had a lot of things to gaming in general that just can't be ignored. Then with Burning Crusade, I'm going to have to give Burning Crusade an S tier. Whatever issues people have with TBC Classic, including myself, I really dislike where TBC Classic has ended up being, but for all the issues TBC Classic has, TBC Classic in many ways, or TBC in many ways, was just a more optimized version of vanilla. A better questing experience that wasn't quite as frustrating, but still had that epic journey, better raids, better dungeons, better class design, better class balance, the introduction of the arena system. It wasn't all fun and games, right? There were issues. The reduction in the raid size is something that I feel Blizzard should have taken back, to be honest with you. And I feel that Blizzard, especially towards the end with Sunwell Plateau, started taking the game in a negative direction. But overall, it's really hard as someone who played TBC from start to finish, and as someone who also started playing in vanilla, it's really hard to walk away from Burning Crusade and say it's anything less than an S tier expansion, because in many ways it's vanilla just improved. Now, not all of those improvements are to my taste, I admit, but that's what BC is. Now, it had absolutely silly moments, the Draenei as a particular example. It had some questionable story developments, but it had a lot going for it. Outland was very well done. The questing experience was really well done. The class balance being improved, the class design being improved, all of these things were good. Now, it's sad that Blizzard messed up TBC Classic by not releasing Tier 5 at the launch, for instance, and other decisions, the questionable decisions they made with it, because that probably has poisoned the well when it comes to TBC. But ultimately, it is one of the best expansions, the best expansion that Blizzard ever released for the game. Now, with Wrath of the Lich King, Wrath of the Lich King gets a B rating. This isn't a popularity contest. Plenty of people say, oh, Wrath was the peak popularity of the game. Yes, it's also the point when World of Warcraft stagnated, when it stopped growing steadily, which it had in vanilla and in TBC. There are reasons behind that. But more importantly, Wrath is where Blizzard went from this epic grand adventure where you meet people along the way, connect with them, to, oh, everything has to be convenient, everything has to be easy, everything has to be at the player's fingertips. It's where they also really pushed the idea of min-maxing, where they introduced heroic rating and different raid sizes, where they also got lazy in many ways. I mean, you look at Wrath of the Lich King, you have 4 raid tiers, but really, TOGC is pretty horrible. It's just a one-room raid with as little effort as they could get away with doing that. And Nax 2.0 is just extremely lazy, reusing the same raid that they had in vanilla. It's like, oh, people want to do it, we want to show it again. Yeah, but that's cool, but not as the main raid that people have to deal with for months and months and months on end. There are a lot of bad things in Wrath. And we also saw the introduction of the gear score system. We saw, as I said, the introduction of multiple raid sizes for every single raid, as opposed to having specific raids like Zulaman or Karazhan, and before Zul'Gurub or AQ20 for smaller raid sizes. In quite a lot of ways, a lot of the issues that WoW deals with to this day were created in Wrath. That said, there are things that Wrath did very well. Old War is an amazing raid. ICC, not quite as great, but there's some pretty memorable boss fights as well. The class design was significantly improved. For all the accusations that people might throw, oh, the classes became the same, basically. For all those kind of accusations, they were vastly improved, and the overall gameplay, the moment-to-moment gameplay was vastly improved compared to what we had before. I mean, you play TBC even right now, and then you play Wrath. There's a reason why Wrath is one of the most popular expansions that people play on private servers, even more popular than vanilla. For all the push that has been with getting vanilla to get the vanilla version, or for Blizzard to do classic, for all the push, Wrath is probably going to be very popular. That doesn't mean it doesn't have issues. That doesn't mean it didn't have enormous negative consequences. And the story was also told in a pretty childish way compared to the subtle storytelling that we had in both vanilla and TBC. It's just an inferior version in quite a few ways, and the damage it did to the game, to gaming in general, to the MMORPG genre was immense. The legacy of Wrath is not a good one. Let's be clear on this. You have heroic raiding introduced. You have multiple raid sizes being introduced. You have the culture of split raiding being introduced. You have so many things that plague the game to this day being introduced in Wrath. That's why it gets a B rating. It's not as bad. In fact, it's probably more enjoyable to play for a lot of people than vanilla or TPC are right now. But the legacy of it and the fact that Blizzard would only release 2 proper rating tiers, which was Old War and ICC, those are the kind of things that drag it down. Then you have Cataclysm. Cataclysm, I'm going to put that alongside Wrath. Yes, it had a very silly story. Deathwing was horribly done. He's not as cool as the Lich King. And this is actually one of the problems of Cataclysm. There's some cool elements, but they just don't compare to things like World War or the Lich King or other things. But that said, Cataclysm is where dungeons, heroic dungeons, became relevant again after being destroyed in Wrath, after being a joke in Wrath the Lich King. This is where they really evolved the gameplay, not on every level, from the open world to dungeons to raiding. And you have really amazing raids. The first raiding tier, with Onyxia, Nefarian, Alakir, Cho'Gall, really good bosses. Then you have Firelands, amazing experience. Dragon Soul, yeah, it's horrible, honestly, but Cataclysm did quite a few things right. It also did quite a few things badly. The storytelling wasn't great overall. The direction they took the story towards wasn't great. There were many problems with Cataclysm, but you could play Cataclysm right now, and it is pretty solid until you get to the dragon, so I suppose. But that's the one thing. Like, just having a good experience up until that point. There are worse expansions than that, far worse versions than that. And surprisingly, Cataclysm does hold up even right now in quite a lot of ways that some other expansions just don't. Then there is Mists of Pandaria. Now, Mists, gonna get the C rating. I know what people will say. Oh, Throne of Thunder was great, and Siege of Orgrimmar was great. Yes, that's true. Two raids do not make an expansion, and they do not make up for how horrible MoP was at launch, or the silliness of what MoP was, the pandas. It just ended up being a very silly expansion that a lot of people couldn't take seriously until much later. Now, it ended on a high note. If it hadn't ended on a high note, it would be even a lower rating here on this list. I remember some people, oh, this was one of the best expansions in the history of the game. No, MoP overall, for all the good that it did in certain areas, like having 2 good raid tiers, MoP was pretty bad in quite a lot of ways. It did a lot of things in a very bad way. Not completely rock bottom, but still plenty of issues, especially at the start. They did improve it gradually as time went on. They did release 2 good raiding tiers, especially Siege of Orgrimmar, which, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the best raids that Blizzard has released in the history of the game. But all the same, it did start off in a very weak position. It kind of redeemed itself towards the end. And similar to Mists of Pandaria, we have Warlords of Draenor, though I think, honestly, this is borderline C between D. I'm tempted to put it on a D rating. It's kind of similar, actually. Both MoP and WoD started off on a very bad note. In fact, Draenor is a lot more, is even worse because the storyline is complete nonsense. Oh, and hey, here's an idea for Blizzard. Let's have a time travel storyline in an expansion. Okay, that's silly to begin with, but let's have a time travel storyline so we can have all these orc warlords that are dead canon-wise, so people can deal with them. Okay. That could work. You know, there's some really cool characters, but then let's not focus on those characters because there's too many orcs. Let's instead focus on characters like Irel as an example, or the growth, which they did. Let's not have Doomhammer play any important role. Yeah, let's have all the nonsensical storyline that we could ever imagine, and let's destroy the entire purpose that we made this expansion for. Because one, they didn't have enough female characters. That was one of the complaints. That's why you see Irel as an example playing such a prominent role. That was the reason, I imagine, that they put her in such a prominent role. And look, it's fine to get annoyed by the fact that Blizzard decided to not focus on female characters for an expansion, but here's the problem with that. They completely negated the original purpose of WoD by doing that. Did it have good elements? Sure. Blackrock Foundry and Hellfire Citadel, pretty good raids. The garrison system, the introduction of that, absolutely terrible. Many horrible things. I'd say story-wise, the only good things that came out of Warlords of Draenor were Khadgar and Gul'dan, and that's pretty much it. Everything else was at best mediocre, at worst rock bottom, and I barely put it above D tier, just barely. Like, if there was a point, it's like a C minus. Like MoP, you could consider like a C. Warlords of Draenor is like maybe a D plus. That's where I stand on this issue. Then we have Legion. Now, Legion, it's kind of tricky. I would have to put Legion as a B rating, though lower than either Wrath or Cataclysm. See, here's the thing about Legion. It had great characters. It had an interesting, compelling storyline that WoW had been building up for a while, like confronting the Legion. Khadgar, Thuralion, Illyria finally took Blizzard long enough to introduce them. Good raids, really good raids overall. Really good raids. Great story. Focus on the class order holes. Great stuff. Like the garrison system on WoD was absolutely terrible. The class orders with the storylines there, with the focus on the class characters and the class lore, pretty good stuff. Overall, a lot of good things in Legion. But, and this has to be said, but Legion was where the segregation of the player base, which had been happening beforehand because of gear score, because of multiple raid sizes, multiple raid difficulties, really was taken to a new level. Artifact power, Titan forging, war forging, all these things, they came in Legion. And those things have had such an enormously negative impact on the community, on the game, on the player base overall, and it's pushed that segregation much further. And then the idea of, oh, mythic ratings, mythic dungeons. Sounds great, right? No. I'm sorry, no. Because that's just another segregation in the player base. That's what it does. Like, Blizzard just keeps adding ways for people to be separated. That's what Artifact Power did. Never mind the fact that it was an annoying, endless grind that any serious raider had to do. You add all of these things together, Legion has a lot of problems, and it did enormous damage to the game and its community. So did Wrath. Cataclysm is a B rating because it's not as good as it could have been. Wrath and Legion are B rating because they did enormous damage to the community, to the game overall. That still persists in large part to this day. Then we have Battle for Azeroth. D rating. Worst expansion in the history of the game. Imagine all of the bad elements of Legion, the artifact power, grinding, the segregated player base, Titan forging, and war forging, with none of the good stuff. None of the epic storylines, none of the great characters like Illidan or Khadgar or anything like that. And that's what you get with Battle for Azeroth. Crap concept, crap execution, and in some ways, Legion did a number. Legion was kind of the high point of, or the conclusion, I guess, of the World of Warcraft storyline, or the Warcraft storyline, and BFA is just money grubbing, really. I mean, if WoW had ended with Legion, it wouldn't have been the worst possible end, but BFA, it's like, oh, how do we string this along? That's the problem with it. That's one of the problems of one of the big problems with Battle for Azeroth. And on top of that, they just basically continued with many of the same problems Legion had, without any of the good stuff that Legion had. And yes, you get a horrible expansion as a result of that. And then finally, Shadowlands. Where would I rate Shadowlands? Well, I'm going to give it a C rating. Some people would say it deserves an even worse rating, and I would be inclined to agree in some ways. But look, with Shadowlands, they have tried to fix some of the problems that Legion created, or even problems that exist before that. Have they fixed all of them? No. Shadowlands isn't terrible. Let me be clear on this. It's boring. That's the part. That's the issue. It's just dull to play it. There's no excitement to be had in playing Shadowlands. Oh, there's this cool storyline and all that, and you see these developers in their videos talking, oh, well, look, we're doing this cool stuff. No one cares. The storyline is garbage. The new lore, not that interesting, and they have fixed some issues, sure, but not enough. It's a step forward from rock bottom, I suppose, but you're just getting out of rock bottom. You're not reaching the heights you had previously. And there we stand. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more, boys and girls.